You're listening to the November 13th, 2015 edition of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast, the weekly podcast that's focused exclusively on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. On today's episode, we have an interview with Christian Lees. He's the CTO and CSO at InfoArmor. They recently released a report about digital certificates that are for sale on the cybercrime underground, and we talk about how advanced persistent threat actors are using these certificates to make their malware harder to detect. This podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Hello everybody out there, I'm Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. That interview with Christian Lees will be coming up in a little bit, as well as some discussion around ransomware, a new leak being reported by the Intercept, and the latest trending advisories and legal actions. But first, we're going to be recapping the top trending cybercrime events from the past week, and I'll throw that over to you, Matt.
Now, I feel like every time we go into this, Jeff, maybe we should start doing that David Letterman top 10, like, they had the drum roll and Paul Schaefer, music.
Yeah, we could throw in some cheesy radio sound effects.
Yeah, right. Coming in number 3 this week, we have TouchNote. TouchNote's a London-based postcard business, and they revealed in a statement on November 5th that the company had been breached. How many customers were affected or who was behind the attack has yet to be determined. TouchNote does believe, however, that the attackers obtained customer information such as names, email addresses, home addresses, order histories, and dates of birth. Coming in number 2, we have TalkTalk Telecom, and this is something that we've talked about every week for the last few weeks. The data breach of TalkTalk, we found out through reports, is going to cost the company somewhere in the area of 30 to 35 million euros, and that's according to the company's CEO, Dito Harding. Harding said that the money will be used to cover the response to the incident, calls to its call centers, additional IT and technology costs, and it also accounts for the money lost due to their online sales sites being down for the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and another thing I saw just this morning, Matt, no surprise really, but there's reports of telephone scams using TalkTalk's name. Pretty much see this after every major breach, but scammers are calling people and telling them that they're either the victim or that they're entitled to compensation due to this breach, and then they pretend to put them through to a supervisor who will make an offer and try to persuade them to log into their bank accounts, or else they try to persuade them to enter a command prompt on their computer to give thieves control of their machine. So, just something to be aware of, as always with all these breaches. Scammers kind of follow up and try to victimize more people.
And number 1, the big one that has been talked about all week, we have ProtonMail. This encrypted email service was the victim of a DDoS extortion attack. The company was asked to pay a ransom to avoid a future DDoS attack. Jeff, I think we actually talked about that not long ago. Companies like, it's almost, I want to say it's a new tactic, but we're seeing this trend a lot. A hacker will come up and be like, hey, if you want to avoid this attack, pay this ransom.
Yeah, I think there's a couple active groups out there that have been doing this tactic the past couple months.
Yeah, and this specific group that we're talking about, they're called the Armada Group. Anyway, ProtonMail decided to actually pay the ransom, which is about $6,000. So they paid the ransom, even though, they're getting kind of ridiculed for it. A little later, ProtonMail got hit with a DDoS attack anyway. What's interesting about this story is that it's widely believed that it was not the Armada Group that actually hit them with the second DDoS attack. The Armada Group actually sent out a message to them saying, almost apologetic, the sympathetic cyber criminals, saying, hey, we didn't, you paid the ransom, we didn't attack you. ProtonMail believes that this second attack came from it was backed by a wealthy nation state. And just to give a little information on that, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit, this attack lasted quite some time. I believe they were down for 7 days, and they're actually currently still being attacked. They're just able to kind of overcome it. Those are top trending industry targets from the week. And staying on that topic of ProtonMail, here is a quote from ProtonMail, and this is in a blog post that they wrote on Tuesday. It has now been 1 week since the first attack was launched against ProtonMail. Since then, we have been subject to the largest and most extensive cyber attack in Switzerland, with hundreds of companies also hit as collateral damage. In addition to hitting ProtonMail, the attackers also took down the data center housing our servers and attacked several upstream ISPs, causing serious damage. So, kind of a big deal here, Jeff. They pay the ransom, and then it's almost like an unfortunate circumstance. They get attacked by another group.
I can see why that group would be apologetic, because obviously if they're trying to extort people, they want people to think that if they pay, they're not going to get attacked. Otherwise, who the heck's going to pay them? Even though pretty much everyone says you should never pay DDoS extortion, at least people that we've talked to.
Why did they pay did they give any reason why they paid?
Yeah, there was a blog post earlier in the week by them, and they said that they didn't really want to pay. They said it was a collective decision taken by all of the impacted companies, and that while they disagreed with it, they decided to do it because obviously other companies would be caught up in this DDoS attack as well. And they said, quote, "We hope that by paying, we could spare the other companies impacted by the attack against us. But the attacks continued nevertheless. This was clearly a wrong decision, so let us be clear to all future attackers, ProtonMail will never pay another ransom." And obviously they wanted to make that perfectly clear, because of the reason why a lot of people say never to pay a DDoS attack ransom is because then you're just going to get put on the list of known targets that's willing to pay and, likely be a victim of, future extortion attempts.
Yeah, those customer service savvy cyber criminals might might leave you alone for a little bit, I mean, they don't want to hit you all the time, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, they will. Why not hit them again?
So one interesting thing I saw, just today I saw a tweet by ProtonMail, and they said that their GoFundMe campaign might be the first example of fighting cybercrime with crowdfunding. If so, our supporters just made history. I don't know if that's true or not, if that really is the first example. I don't really know too much about people using GoFundMe to support different companies' defense funds. But I'm looking at the page right now. They've raised $58,770. So they've met their goal. They wanted to raise $50,000. So it says on their GoFundMe page that they incurred approximately $56,000 worth of expenses in defending ProtonMail, including the estimated cost for defending over the next 12 months. So it's kind of an interesting strategy. They get DDoSed, they pay the ransom, and then they kind of ask the community, like, hey, we need some help, and people are going in and they're donating, and they've met their goals. So it's interesting.
Well, in my opinion, when I did a little research, it seems like they're a pretty solid company. They're trying to provide encrypted email. They don't have a ton of money. I don't know if they actually even charge for their services, to be honest with you. So I was a little surprised that this company was targeted, but it just kind of goes to show you that cybercriminals don't really care who you are or what you're into. They just want money out of you. So,
yeah, and there was a lot of similar news this week. We had this extortion story. I think ProtonMail, looking at the data earlier today, was by far, just hands down, the most discussed story for the week. But there was a lot of other little interesting stories in there kind of related to it, because this story is all about extortion. There was a lot of ransomware news this week. I think the biggest ransomware item was CryptoWall 4.0 was spotted. Just a little background, CryptoWall 3.0 as a piece of ransomware that was first spotted by researchers at the beginning of 2015 in January. And the Cyber Threat Alliance, they put out a report, I believe, at the end of October. And according to figures released by the Cyber Threat Alliance, CryptoWall 3.0 has extorted $325 million from tens of thousands of victims worldwide. So that's a pretty effective piece of ransomware.
Well, it is very effective. And, going back a little bit, and we've talked about this before, even the FBI has come out and actually suggested that we pay ransoms for some of these attacks. And this CryptoWall variant of ransomware is widely regarded as a very, very strong ransomware, and it affects a lot of people. So actually that figure, to be honest with you, Jeff, I actually thought that was low. I thought it'd be a lot higher.
Well, and now this CryptoWall ransomware has even come out with new improvements. We got CryptoWall 4.0. Researchers at Heimdall Security, they identified this new strain of ransomware, which they call CryptoWall 4.0. And they identified, three changes. One of them was just a change in, the message that pops up. So that really wasn't too important. But the two big changes, one, it has vastly improved communication abilities. So this ransomware, this new version now has a modified protocol that enables it to avoid being detected, even by second generation enterprise firewall solutions. So they said that this is obviously lowers the detection rate significantly compared to the already successful CryptoWall 3.0. And then they also said that CryptoWall 4.0 now encrypts not only the data in your files, but the file names as well. So this social engineering technique confuses the victims even more, and it enhances the pressure of wanting to retrieve their data as fast as possible. Heimdall Security is saying that this is going to increase the success ratio of how many victims see the message versus how many pay the ransom.
So we have a ransomware here. CryptoWall was already kind of renowned as being very successful, and now it's becoming even more efficient. Never been more important for people to back up their files and make sure that they're up to date with all their security updates. It's very important.
There was one little interesting piece of news. Bitdefender, they put out a blog post on Tuesday this week, and they said that to stop the spread of this threat, their anti-malware experts have developed an antidote, they called it, which is basically they say that they have a piece of software that you can download from their site that allows users to immunize their computers and block file encryption attempts. But they added that if your computer is already infected with CryptoWall, the vaccine, they use the word vaccine, is not going to help disinfect it. It's just, going to stop those encryption attempts from happening. That's kind of interesting.
That's very interesting. And, and this has been a popular week for ransomware. We have a couple other ransomware-related stories. There's a new variant found by a Russian antivirus company called Dr. Web. It's a new strain of ransomware that specifically targets websites powered by Linux OS. Many of the systems that were affected by this malware were infected when attackers exploited a vulnerability in the Magento content management system. This malware is being called Linux Encoder 1, and like most ransomwares, attackers demand either like a Bitcoin or a ransom payment. They demand this payment in order for the victim to regain control of their computer after they encrypt your files.
Another interesting note from Bitdefender here, I saw that they found a flaw in this ransomware. So they put out a blog post, once again, saying that there's a major flaw in the way that the encoder Trojan is designed, and that this allowed Bitdefender researchers to recover the AES key without having to decrypt it with the RSA private key. So, short story, if you were infected with this particular Linux ransomware, you may be able to get your files back.
Yeah, well, in this case, okay, you might be able to get your files back, but if you're attacked with this next ransomware, you're just screwed. There's no other way to say it. There's another new ransomware that's out there is being called PowerWorm. PowerWorm infects Microsoft Word and Excel files, but the latest update attempts to go after more types of files. In this case, the poorly written update discovered by malware researcher Nathan Scott results in no key being created for the files and encrypts when it compromises a computer. So essentially, if you're attacked with PowerWorm, your data's gone, is essentially it. I mean, unless somehow you can decipher the encryption, it's gone. The attacker, there's nothing they can do to decrypt your data because there is no key present. So essentially, they're a bunch of meanies in this tech. It's not much of a business model.
Yeah, so just ransomware. It seems like that was kind of the theme of the week. There was actually another piece of ransomware news. There was a proof of concept malware that was introduced by a Brazilian cybersecurity researcher. The researcher's name was Rafael Salima Marquez. And the proof of concept shows that Macs are not completely protected from ransomware attacks. Marquez hasn't released the full code, but he did share it with Apple and Symantec. Symantec confirmed that the threat does in fact work, and they said that they believe it's the first case of file-based crypto ransomware for OS X. So it seems like ransomware, we've been talking about it for a while, but it just seems like every week it just grows more and more into a problem for people.
Moving on to the advisories for the week, we'll get you guys caught up in some of those, and we have quite a few. We're going to start off with a new Apple ID phishing scam. Apple users, be warned. Attackers are using phishing emails against Apple users. This new email comes from verify@appe.com. Now, that's important because if you were to look at that and just, if you can visualize what I'm saying, Apple is spelled APPLE, and this email comes up as APPE. So it's kind of a detector when you're looking at this email to say this could be off. This particular email tells the customer about a limitation on their account and provides a link for them to click on to remove this limitation or to do whatever they're suggesting and to update their data. The email does appear to be legitimate because it uses the same graphic style as an actual Apple email. But again, with these types of emails, these phishing attacks, there's usually a tell in how you can see if it's fake or not. And if you look at the address on this one, that was a clear tell for this. Apple ID phishing scam out there, watch out for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We talk about these phishing scams, and a lot of times I kind of breeze over in my head, oh, it's just another phishing scam. But I believe that the Sony hack started with a series of Apple phishing emails as well. I believe they targeted some of Sony's system administrators and network administrators. They were asked to verify their Apple IDs with these fake emails, and then they stole some information and kind of snowballed from there. So just kind of interesting because you see these stories and you just think, oh, big deal, just another scam. But that is how a lot of these big breaches do start, with these simple social engineering tactics. Then moving on, we have another advisory. This one kind of ties into our interview that we got coming up later. It has to do with digital certificates. Komodo, which is a trusted certificate authority, they acknowledge that they mistakenly issued transport layer security credentials for Mail Archive, Help, and at least 5 other forbidden names, and warn that other certificate authorities have done the same thing. These certificates are forbidden under the requirements set by the Certificate Authority Browser Forum, a group that ensures digital certificates can be trusted on Chrome, Internet Explorer, and other browsers. The protections are in place to eliminate people from spying on other resources that use similar names or IP addresses.
Yeah, then we have another advisory, and this one, I think the biggest shocker here to me, just because we hear so much, was that there were 30 different tablet brands. But I'll get into it. There's some tablets being sold on Amazon and other popular online stores that come pre-installed with a Trojan. The Trojan is called Cloud Soda. And again, it's being sold on these stores. According to Cheetah Mobile, at least 17,000 of these infected, and they're saying Android tablets, were delivered to customers. More than 153 countries have been affected by these compromised tablets.
Yeah, something to keep in mind as you're getting ready to do your Christmas shopping. I'm kind of in the market for a tablet myself. I guess that's what you get when you buy the cheapest one out there. You might get infected.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that before. Like, some of these knockoff tablets are not a good idea, and they come with several vulnerabilities. I do remember when I was looking at one of the charts for this that it said the majority of these tablet brands were, like, not mainstream.
Yeah, that wraps up a lot of the advisories out there. There was an interesting story that I saw this morning that popped out on the Intercept. If you'll remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the drone story. There was a big release of drone documents from an anonymous leaker. Now the Intercept has published another story. They said that they have an enormous cache. I think they said the file was 37 gigabytes. This enormous cache worth of phone records that was obtained by the Intercept. Apparently, it's from a major security breach at Securus Technologies. Now, Securus is a leading provider of phone services inside the United States prisons and jails. The materials comprise over 70 million records of phone calls placed by prisoners to at least 37 states, in addition to links to downloadable recordings of the calls. The calls span a nearly 2.5-year period beginning in December 2011 and ending in the spring of 2014.
Yeah, so like Jeff said, the materials were leaked via SecureDrop, and it was by an anonymous hacker who believes that Securus is violating the constitutional rights of inmates. SecureDrop is an open-source whistleblower submission system that was originally programmed by the late Aaron Swartz and is maintained by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. This system was used by the anonymous hacker to send files to the Intercept.
Yeah, and the big news from these isn't necessarily, all 70 million phone calls, but the Intercept wrote that particularly notable within this vast trove of records are what appear to be at least 14,000 recorded conversations between inmates and attorneys, which is a strong indication that at least some of the recordings are likely confidential and privileged legal communications, calls that should have never been recorded in the first place. So obviously, even if you're a criminal, you have the right to confidential communications with your lawyer, because that's kind of a foundation of the rights of the United States. So yeah, I thought this was kind of interesting because the Intercept, they've kind of been sort of the go-to place for a lot of these big leaks. Back in October with the drone story, Edward Snowden, he tweeted that when we look back on today and the Strone story, we will find the most important national security story of the year. And now with this new story, we have the director of ACLU's National Prison Project, and he said about the Securus leak that, quote, "This may be the most massive breach of the attorney-client privilege in modern U.S. history, and that's certainly something to be concerned about. A lot of prisoners' rights are limited because of their conviction and incarceration, but their protection by the attorney-client privilege is not."
Yeah, and it appears that this isn't actually the first breach for Securus. According to documents provided to the Intercept by a Texas attorney, Securus' system was apparently breached last July 2014 when someone hacked 3 calls made by an inmate named Aaron Hernandez. We're assuming that this is the former player for the New England Patriots who was awaiting trial for killing his friend.
It's kind of complicated into who's actually responsible when it comes to notifying people about these attorney-client privileges. The Intercept said that in many jurisdictions, including Texas, the onus is on the lawyer of the clients to give phone numbers to prison officials so that they can be placed on the do not record list. So in that case, failing to provide up-to-date contact information would make any inadvertent recordings the attorney or the inmate's fault, but then properly logging those numbers is the government responsibility, and secure storage of that is squarely up to Securus. So there's kind of 3 different players kind of going on here. But I got an email just like an hour before we started recording with a quote from Chris Pogue. He's the Senior Vice President of Cyber Threat Analysis at Nuix. And he said in the email, he said, based on his understanding of privileged communications, this breach is very troublesome. Not only were the rights of the affected inmates potentially violated, but also that of the attorneys. He said that the release of what was believed to be private conversations between attorneys and their clients could have a significant negative impact on those attorneys and their respected firms. And obviously, if you can prove that there was damage caused to these firms, then, they would have, basis for potential litigation. But then he also went on to say that this incident will most certainly attract the attention of the FTC. If you remember a couple weeks ago on the podcast, we were talking about the case of the Federal Trade Commission versus Wyndham Worldwide, and we had an interview with Thomas Roback where we were talking about standing there. This is something that Chris Pogue agrees with. He says that the FTC has recently become much more aggressive in their probing of organizations who have suffered a data breach. And by Securus advertising that they have a secure call platform and then allegedly failing to provide that service in a manner consistent with reasonable security practices, Securus could be accused of engaging in deceptive business practices. And that's kind of what that case of FTC versus Wyndham Worldwide was all about. So it could be interesting to see how this story plays out and if any of those legal things develop in the coming months.
Prisoners have rights too, man.
Exactly. We were actually talking about that before the podcast. That's one of the few areas where it's like where normal, rational people will just like completely not care about like human rights abuses is because they're in prison.
Moving on with more legal news. This was an interesting story, Jeff. A man was charged with manipulating the stock market via Twitter. James Alan Craig of Scotland was arrested and charged with committing securities fraud. Craig created 2 Twitter accounts with similar names used by real market research firms Audience and Sarepta. Craig would tweet false stories about the company, suggesting they were under some type of fraudulent investigation. Once the news hit, the stock prices for the companies fell, and Craig would then purchase the stock in those companies. In total, his actions cost stockholders about $1.6 million. It was never released about how much money Craig made, which unfortunately would have been something I would have been interested in.
Well, I did see, I saw one article where they said that it didn't amount to much, was at least the impression that one of the people involved in the case said.
Well, and I did see, when I was reading into that, it's not like he bought, I don't know which company he bought like a certain amount of stock for, but I know that he bought stocks, like 100 stocks in one of the companies and 400 in the other one. So I don't know how much what the shares were or anything like that, but they'd have to go up quite a bit for him to get rich off of that.
Yeah, you have to have a significant amount to invest for something like that to work. But that's interesting that this story came up because just last week on the podcast, me and you were chatting about with the TalkTalk breach, how not that TalkTalk had anything to do with manipulating the stock market, but how that was a potential avenue that people were going to go down. And then sure enough, the very next week, we see this guy kind of doing it in a boneheaded way. He's not going to make very much money with just a couple hundred stock. And he obviously got caught. So.
Yeah, that leaving your digital footprint. I mean, they could just go back to the source of the tweets and like, oh, who's this guy? Or this isn't our company, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind of boneheaded.
A couple more legal stories we have here. The Hartford Hospital and their business partner EMC have agreed to pay $90,000 in connection with a 2002 theft of an unencrypted laptop.
2012, Jeff, sorry.
Oh, good call. That'd be, a long way for a fine, huh? They agreed to pay $90,000 in connection with a 2012 theft of an unencrypted laptop. Information on almost 9,000 Connecticut residents were compromised as a result of the stolen laptop. The fine is part of an agreement with Connecticut's Attorney General. Like I said, $90,000 they're going to be paying. Another healthcare legal item that popped up this week, more than a dozen lawsuits have been filed against the parent and sister companies of Univera Healthcare. Excelis Health Plans and Lifetime Healthcare are being sued for failing to protect their customers' data. The lawsuits are tied with the September 2014 cyber attacks that saw 10.5 million people have their information compromised.
Yeah, moving on, we have a DC man who pled guilty to income tax fraud. Ezekiel Raspberry, which is, I'm totally stealing that.
I think that's my all-time favorite name I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And of Washington, D.C., has pleaded guilty to charges related to income tax fraud. Ezekiel Raspberry.
That's what I'm going to name my kid. If I ever have a kid. Ezekiel Raspberry Peters. Oh, man.
Raspberry is the second defendant to plead guilty in a fraud scheme that obtained more than $300,000 in fraudulent federal income tax returns. Raspberry faces a potential 30-month prison sentence and a fine of $50 and a fine of $50,000, while also having to pay restitution of $315,076 back to the IRS for his crimes.
And then going back to the JPMorgan Chase hack, there has been 3 men that have been arrested and charged in relation to the biggest financial institution consumer data hack in the United States. The 3 men face a 23-count indictment for their roles in the attack. Obviously, that's a big story. That's probably going to be something that plays out in the coming months. And we'll keep you guys up to date on what happens with that. Yeah,
and we knew that there was some arrests made for that hack, but I think this is just like taking another step forward. Now they've been charged. And, like Jeff says, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so moving on from all the legal stuff, we have our funny story of the week. Did you find anything out there this week that give us a little chuckle?
Yeah, I did. This just falls in the dumb category, in my opinion. When we're talking about Facebook ridicule for a lot of things, misinformation. A lot of people get their news from Facebook and everything. We're going to talk about Facebook photos today. A Facebook photo can tell the world a lot about yourself. It can show the world what your interests are, how many people are in your family, weekend activities. And if you're really stupid, you can divulge a lot of personal information that can lead to theft. Case in point, we have a woman, Chantel. She's our victim today, if you want to call it that. Chantel went to the Melbourne Cup, which is Australia's most prestigious thoroughbred horse race. She placed a $20 bet on a horse with 100 to 1 odds, and she won. Wow. Good day. Yeah, that's great for her.
Good bet.
Chantel won $825 when it was all said and done. She was so excited that she immediately took a selfie of herself and the winning ticket and posted them on Facebook. The photo was used by an anonymous source to claim the winnings. So Chantel, because she posted the winning ticket information on Facebook, someone used that information, they had the numbers, and they claimed the winnings.
All these people are obsessed with selfies. That's one of the life lessons you gotta learn.
And this was a quote from Chantel. She said, "To the lowlife who was obviously my friend on Facebook and used my photo to claim our winnings, you're a massive dick. You ruined my day." You hear stories about how people, I've seen it on Reddit a couple times, like on the list of stupid things people do. People posting a Facebook photo, look at my shiny brand new credit card, or here's my checking account number. I've never heard of this one, though, in particular.
All right, now coming up, we have our interview with Christian Lees, the CTO and CSO at InfoArmor, and we're going to talk about digital certificates for sale on the underground and how they're impacting the cybercrime world. before we get into the specifics of the report, just wondering if you could fill us in on what digital certificates are and why malicious actors using them is an area of concern.
Certainly, yeah. Essentially, a digital certificate is an electronic document that's used to prove the ownership of a public key. Typically, it includes information regarding to the owner's identity or organization, and therefore you can better understand the identity of with whom you're preparing to communicate with. And traditionally, a CA or a certificate authority is the entity that issues digital certificates and certifies the ownership or creates the trust model or trust network itself. As for why malicious actors using them is an area of concern, certainly threat actors expanding into the use of trust type of networks will most definitely expand the life of a campaign by potentially hiding the existence of the malware longer, ultimately netting more victims and increasing their revenue. But there's a great potential these digital certificates will likely become a precious commodity within the underground.
Yeah, and in the report you guys put out, you wrote about one tool in specific, the GovRat tool. And you guys said that it's been used to target governments, financial institutions, defense contractors, as well as more than 100 corporations since 2014. Could you just fill us in a little bit on what that tool is and how it works?
Certainly, yeah. Once the malicious agent with the digital signature is deployed successfully into the victim's device, it bypasses the antivirus and uses SSL connections to further obfuscate communications with the command and control. And according to the InfoArmor research, the results of the code signing allowed the bad actor to make its malware undetectable from nearly 30 AV tools. So it's pretty effective. It's also notable that this tool is very large and complex. And additionally, it uses some advanced techniques to obfuscate the code via string protect. So it's very complex to evaluate.
And then I'm wondering, I don't know if you know necessarily the answer to this, but is it a tool that's being used by a wide variety of actors and groups? And is it targeting, a wide variety of people, or is it more focused around a couple actors and a couple verticals?
It's hard to say at this time, but I mean, in the report, we outlined that it's, there's some government organization, there's financial, it appears to be somewhat not necessarily focused on a single vertical.
And I've seen a few stories this year related to stolen digital certificates. I guess the one that remains in my mind is, I think it was Dooku 2.0, which targeted Iran's nuclear negotiations and Kaspersky Lab as well. And it seems like it's more, that kind of attack is more tied with like cyber espionage and advanced threats. Just wondering if that's kind of the perception that you get. This is more of a espionage kind of tool.
It's a logical deduction, however, it's just simply too hard to say. This environment it's so stealthy and so new. Hard to say.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering if you can speculate just a little bit. Obviously, these underground markets are making it easier to get these certificates. So is there concern that this tactic's maybe going to get picked up by other groups and become more widespread, or do you think it's going to remain kind of a niche thing?
Great question. Absolutely. It's possible that, code signing certificate already is or could be a very ripe market. And these campaigns, with valid digital certificates further enable detection evasion. And of course, if these tactics show some traction, I would certainly assume that the market would grow. It's simply supply and demand.
You did write that it's quite easy to find code signing digital certificates issued by places like Komodo and GoDaddy, and it's clear that digital certificates could be revoked by the certificate authorities, but as explained by numerous sellers, the event's rare and often companies are slow in validating them. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on why that process is so slow and any concerns about that.
Well, the research, completed by Andrew and our team, outlines that, the sale of code signing certificate is on the increase. In this instance, a threat actor was able to, misrepresent and obtain a valid digital certificate. It is clear that the revoking of certificates is rare, but I can't really speak as to how often the revoke takes place. Again, it's such a new environment.
My final question, just sort of thinking, say your business and you're worried about this, is there anything that they should be aware of in regards to this threat? Is it something that you think they should be concerned about, or something that's more, kind of niche and not an area of concern yet?
That is hard to say. It's a really niche market. It's clear that it has impacted some public organizations today. It has impacted some government organizations today. And I would recommend that, we all keep a strong finger on the pulse of this growing environment.
And that's pretty much all the questions I have, unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on.
When you think about it, yeah, this malware is evading some of the most sophisticated security gaps that we have in place. So it's a really new market.
Well, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And that'll do it for this week's episode of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast. As always, the Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact of their business, and proactively address threats head-on. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can find us on iTunes, YouTube, and all the major podcasting sites. And for more information on keeping your organization safe from cybercrime, check out surfwatchlabs.com.